Okay, we can start the session. Thank you so much for the panelists who joined us today, Sowmya and Shane. Do you want to do a quick introduction, say a bit more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I'll start.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm Sowmya Vajjala. I work as a NLP researcher at National Research Council, Canada. I've been here for about 5 years now. I primarily work on classic NLP tasks like information extraction, text classification, looking at cross-lingual transfer and these kind of things. But in my past life, I did a lot of interdisciplinary work with educational psychologists, economists, and cognitive psychologists. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Shane, can...
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Shane Steinert-Threlkeld. I'm an assistant professor in the Linguistics department at the University of Washington, where I teach in a computational linguistics master's and PhD program that we have. My research is kind of at the intersection of cognitive science and natural language processing. So a lot of stuff that's using NLP methods to help us learn about human cognition, and then a lot of things going the other direction of using what we know about how humans process language to understand and interpret NLP systems. I've also been doing a lot of stuff recently on multilingual NLP. When it comes to the topic of this this session, I sort of have never really fit in a particular discipline as they're defined in our university system. So I'm now in a linguistics department as a faculty member, but I have 0 degrees in linguistics. So my undergraduate was in philosophy, math, and computer science, sort of equal parts. And then I did a PhD in a philosophy department, actually, but in a subtrack called symbolic systems at Stanford, where it was a mix of philosophy, psychology, linguistics, and computer science as well. My postdoc was also at a place called Institute for Logic, Language, and Computation, which was a similar like interdisciplinary mix as well. So there has been some computer science throughout there, but it was never it was not my undergrad major or PhD. And I've always been working at a kind of interdisciplinary nexus between computer science and other fields like philosophy, linguistics, and psychology.
That's great. And thank you so much. So you both have plenty of interdisciplinary experience. So that's great. The panel for today is NLP for non-CS students working on interdisciplinary research. So this means more like if you're from a department that doesn't traditionally use computer science or computational methods, maybe you do instead some surveys or hand coding, annotations, things like that. So this panel, we ask questions in Slido. I put the link in the channel for everyone to see. So we read the questions from there, and you can also vote your favorite question, and that if we have a lot of questions, we read them in that order. So we get to the most popular ones first. So yeah, now that you know more about the panelists, you can ask questions. And yeah, any questions you have regarding interdisciplinary research. Yeah, so again, the link to ask questions is in the meeting chat. So feel free to use that. For now, we don't really have questions. Also, you can, I think it's a fun way, like a icebreaker okay, so the question is, when doing interdisciplinary research, how do you know that you have enough expertise in your field to be able to contribute in a meaningful way?
Shane, would you like to start first?
Sure. Also, yeah, okay. So I take it with this question, please feel free to correct me in the chat or on Slido if I interpret it wrong. But when you say expertise in your field, that means the sort of non-CS or non-NLP field. So maybe it's psychology, as we've talked about as an example, or maybe it's some kind of more literary field, if you're doing like text analysis or something like that. And then in that case, there's a few thoughts I have. So one is, there's always just doing literature review and finding what the open research questions are and the things that people care about are. And that's true of just every field, whether or not it's NLP or some other field. So you sort of do the relevant literature search, figure out what the sort of open problems are, what people are interested in, and what is unknown. And if you find what's unknown and you can contribute to it, then that suffices. And in the cases that we're kind of describing, NLP is just a good method for helping answer the questions that you're finding interesting. In the case where it is maybe you're sort of moving into a completely new area for interdisciplinary research, this is also a case where collaboration is super helpful. So if you don't feel that you necessarily are like the domain expert in this area, but you want to start working on it, finding a good collaborator can be very helpful, and they'll sort of know more about the literature and its contours and be able to guide you in that way as well. So if you are, say, bringing the NLP expertise into a different area, then you can find a collaborator in that other area that can make sure that you're addressing those questions in sort of natural ways. Those are my sort of first two thoughts. I don't know, Sowmya, if you have others.
Yeah, I mostly agree with what Shane said, but there's also something that I was thinking about when I saw that question. So thinking about it like, from the other side, like let us say I'm an NLP researcher and somebody like say doing applied linguistics asked me to collaborate with them. In those cases, I mean, the assumption there is that you are that NLP expert in the project, right? So I think we should not doubt ourselves when we are supposed to be the expert there. And the doubt should be more about whether you can meaningfully contribute to the project, in the sense that whether do you know enough about applied linguistics, say, for example. Like that's usually my worry when I work with this in these projects. But then over a period of time, I've come to terms with being the stupidest person in the team, just asking questions when I don't have enough idea about that other field, and that's generally working so far. I mean, I'm comfortable with the fact that I'm not the expert in the project, and I know only a part of it.
I mean, beginner's mind can be super valuable in that context, right? When you're doing interdisciplinary research, sometimes it's really good to be coming into this other area as an outsider because you see things differently. And
yeah, and sometimes we also understand, like I personally saw a lot of challenges with doing NLP with other people, because the methods are just different. And sometimes things that you take for granted as an NLP researcher, they just look nonsensical to the other people. Like say in a recent project with a group of economists, the econometric models that they develop, they're completely different from the way we work in NLP, like where you just take a bunch of data and you don't really look at the data that much. You just build a model and then compare it with other models and so on. So those are also like things that come to you when you're doing this interdisciplinary research, things that you don't think normally about, like the standard methods that you follow in your area. That exposure to the other field is useful there.
And then when it comes to writing up the research, this is something that the question and now Sowmya's response triggered in my head as well. Like you have to meet people where they are and think about who your audience is when you're writing this up. So if you're writing for the sort of other field, like the non-NLP field, you can't presuppose lots of things that you might be presupposing. And so like one of my kind of earlier papers that became relatively well cited and somewhat influential was really written for like theoretical linguists and people who have maybe never seen NLP or machine learning at all. And I was using NLP tools to measure sort of the speed of learning of different things that they care about. But the questions were primarily questions from theoretical linguistics. And so in the paper, I mean, there's a whole section explaining like what backpropagation is, because that audience doesn't know that. And so really having to go all the way back and imagining putting yourself in the other audience's shoes and not taking anything for granted is very important for making sure that the research can be received.
And being receptive to feedback too, I guess, because
Mhm.
I recently contributed an article to an applied linguistics journal about generative AI. And I wrote these things like, the emergent abilities and all these things, and they were like, add a qualifier, these things, they don't refer to human intelligence, or, these basically what we call as machine intelligence or whatever is completely different from human, thought processes, and you have to add the disclaimer in the beginning. And then, there were also these discussions like about ethics and stuff. Like what I added there wasn't just enough for them from their perspective. They wanted more discussion and some more, personal stance also at some point of time in the paper. So these kind of things, just on the face of it, they look like hard criticism. They're just coming from a, different perspective, right? Like that's a different audience, and you're not always familiar with what they really want beyond the project you're involved in. So I would say that's also important, like being more receptive to criticism than being reactive.
Thank you so much. I'm still removing some bots, but I enabled the waiting room. So that should minimize their appearance. Yeah, thank you so much for bearing with me. And I agree. It's really great to not minimize your contribution. And a lot of times you bring a new perspective. So try to use that to your advantage. And yeah, that also forces us, like people who have more computer science background, to see things differently and realize you have to explain things in a different way. And that's also how we learn from each other. So I think it's very valuable to have interdisciplinary collaborations. Okay, we have another question. Let's see. So a lot of times it happens that I don't know many of the core CS things, due to which I'm stuck so many times and feel so useless and inept. How do I overcome that? I guess I would like to hear from both of you, both of your perspectives. So Sowmya, if you want to start first.
So I think it's okay. It's natural to, feel that we don't understand a certain core concept. I have been working in this area as a computer science person for a while now, but I still have faced these situations regularly where I don't have a firm grasp of something. So I think it's okay. And these days there are also a lot of resources for us to go somewhere and try to, read up compared to, like, say, 15 years ago. So um, I think it's natural. I mean, I don't think, we have to be so negative about it. Just understand that, it's okay. That's all. I mean, it's not like a good advice, but I think that's what I would do usually, like when I'm stuck somewhere. It's not like something that, I'm incapable or something. It's just that it's something I don't know, which I can know if I spend some time with it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we also, as computer scientists, we can feel like that. Like I definitely sometimes feel like I don't know enough, or I wish I knew more. But then over time, I realized that it's impossible to know everything. It's like each one of us knows a part, and then there's like a diagram, and some parts overlap, some parts don't, and that's how we learn from each other. And we shouldn't feel bad about that. But again, you realize that with time and with each experience you have.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of these sentiments. And I think sort of the longer I've been in a research career, the more I realize that, like, it's sort of a long exercise in becoming comfortable with ignorance, basically, and with what you don't know. And I mean, if research is about pushing, like, the frontier of human knowledge forward, however slightly, like, by definition, you're going to be in situations where you don't know things. And so, yeah, learning to be comfortable with it is important. And I completely agree with all of these sentiments that no one knows everything, and so that's not the right goal. A few sort of just quick and concrete things. So, sort of piggybacking off of one thing Sowmya said about, going out and acquiring new knowledge. I don't know if people know this term from social psychology of like fixed mindset versus growth mindset. And so like there's a idea that there's two ways of viewing different disciplines basically and different activities, where you can have like a fixed mindset that there's a thing that's like an innate ability and you either have it or you don't, versus a growth mindset, which is like there's different skills and abilities that you can grow and acquire and whatnot. And so people have also then looked at different academic disciplines and tried to measure sort of the extent to which they adhere to a fixed versus growth mindset sort of thing. And unsurprisingly, things like computer science and math, and actually philosophy in my own word, which is maybe more surprising, tend to be very high on this like fixed mindset sort of attitude in general and the sort of like culture of the disciplines. And so you definitely, especially in computer science contexts, will encounter people who just make comments like that are extremely negative. And like if you sort of there are many people in these disciplines, and in my case, like it was one of the things that discouraged me from pursuing math in grad school, for instance, and leaving that field, basically, where people do make comments that are almost designed to make you feel dumb and worthless and stupid. And yeah, it's really frustrating when it happens. And I guess the thing I would suggest is to try to like flip it around and realize that's like more about them than about you. And like they're like if people are making comments like that, it's most likely due to something going on in their lives and their heads and whatnot, and not at all about you. And you can go and learn the thing you need to learn. And yeah, that's the other sort of switch flip I would try to encourage.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for being so honest. That's I think everyone encountered those kind of people. Yeah, unfortunately, in the education system, like teachers could be better with the language they're using. Yeah, even in math, or I remember some teachers will use like, oh, this is basic, or this is very easy. Like I recently learned that this kind of words are not okay, because not it kind of discourages the students, right? They would feel like, oh, this is easy, then it's something with me, I should know this. So that leads to that fear of not trying harder, or this view that you have, that you don't know everything. So we can also get better at teaching in a certain way that encourages curiosity and exploration, and lowers this imposter syndrome, or the fear of not knowing things. Thank you so much. We also have another question in Slido. Thank you for adding your questions. As I said, I put a link in the meeting chat, and we're reading the questions from there. So the next question is, do you have recommendations on where to acquire CS fundamentals when coming from a non-CS background? There are many resources and it's hard to choose.
I mean, if it is just getting started with programming, I can probably recommend some things, but in general, CS fundamentals is something I have to really think. So in the past, I've taught courses with applied linguistics students and economics students and things like that, but we always started with programming courses, starting from the very basics, and try to introduce some computer science fundamentals in the course as a part of the course, just thinking in terms of, like thinking like a computer science person. But other than that, I am not really sure if I can recommend something in a more general manner.
Yeah, it's a hard question, and one to I'm also having difficulty thinking of exact things. The link I just put into the chat is so we have at University of Washington here a master's program for computational linguistics, and the demographics of the students are really like 50-50 between sort of primarily CS backgrounds and primarily non-CS backgrounds. And so the link that I put in is kind of a link we have about how to prepare for applying and prepare for the program. And there are things about sort of like, if you've already finished your degree say your undergraduate degree or a different master's, and it's in a non-CS field, like what are things you can do to prepare for the prerequisites and whatnot. And so there's a link to some MOOCs that we think are particularly useful. Certainly like learning how to program, and then in terms of like thinking like a computer scientist, really doing a data structures and algorithms one, I think is really valuable on that front. The other kind of resource that is actually designed for people who get a CS major, but I think is useful for everyone, is this missing semester from MIT, which is really about like using the command line, using version control systems, these kinds of like sort of skills that are often taken for granted or just picked up along the way, but that are never part of like formal training. And so that can also be useful just for not necessarily like the core CS fundamental topics, but for like, you know, the necessary toolkit for conducting computational research.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I see the links here also from Sowmya, an introductory programming book, and the course at MIT. Yeah. Oh, someone also wrote in the Slido. I'm gonna copy paste those from Slido to the chat. So CS50, a course from Harvard on Python. Yeah, Python I think is a good language to start with if you want to get the basics. It's much friendlier than C or C++. It's also much more used in research. So yeah, there's a lot of tutorials what you can do with Python, data analysis, plots. So yeah, that seems like a good resource. And I see it's free. It has assignments and yeah, basics of course, yes. Also, I know there's some platforms online about like on coding. I don't remember exactly their names, but there's so many platforms you can try. I'm gonna browse more because the name, I don't remember the name exactly, but I know I seen recently a very good one. And I was also teaching a Discover CS class for students interested in CS, but who didn't have a minor or a major in CS. They wanted to see if it's for them. And for some students, I recommended this resources from courses online, and they really liked it. And I could see a change in their enthusiasm. And yeah, it really helped them. So yeah, you can take a look at online courses. Yeah, thank you so much. Let's see. So I don't see any new questions on Slido. So if you have more questions, don't forget to add them to Slido link. You can also copy paste it here. I wonder, until we get new questions, do you have maybe some recommendations for students who are just starting on this path of research and applying NLP in interdisciplinary ways?
So we are still talking about non-CS students getting into interdisciplinary projects involving NLP, right?
Yes.
So especially for people who are not coming from CS background but getting involved in this kind of work, I want to say, be assertive about your domain expertise, because it's easy to get carried away by, these fancy models and libraries and all this stuff and think, maybe that is the right thing to do. But oftentimes that need not be the best possible approach. And there may need, you may need more domain knowledge to solve that particular problem. And it's hard as a student and also as somebody who is coming from another discipline seeking some kind of help from NLP to solve some problem in their discipline, to be more assertive, but I think it's necessary. So when I started getting involved in this interdisciplinary projects as a PhD student, of course, I had, it was not just students alone, there were more senior people out there. So it was not difficult for me to get that awareness that they know better about their problem than me. And for somebody from an NLP background working in those kind of projects, I want to just say that it's their problem, it's their domain, sure, but we need to know enough about the domain to be able to meaningfully contribute and get something out of it also. Like it's not you, otherwise you would just remain like some kind of like a, I don't know, technician solving a problem, not like a researcher contributing to it. So yeah, that's my take.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And so like one trap you often see people getting into when they're trying to do this is like thinking that they really need to figure out what's going on at the cutting edge of the NLP stuff in order to apply it to the domain they care about. And that's normally just not at all the case, right? So if you want to use NLP tools to analyze text from a particular domain that you care about, the focus is about the domain that you care about and not the NLP side of things. And so if you're using a model that's a year or two old and not the like newest, fanciest thing, that will be completely fine because it'll still help you answer your research questions. And it's important to just get something that works and that you can use easily off the shelf. And like, that's not going to be the kind of complaint you get from reviewers, for instance. It's like, oh, why didn't you use the model that came out 3 weeks ago instead of the model from a year ago? And yeah, then I more generally, I would say I think of it as like an opportunity and not a curse, right? So like there's all kinds of people working in NLP, and likely when you're doing this kind of research of trying to apply NLP in a different area, there are fewer people. So like Sowmya was mentioning, emphasizing your domain expertise, and the flip side is in that domain, there are probably fewer people that know much about NLP at all. And like you can be the person that's bringing that to bear on these questions that they all care about. And then that's a place where you can also be making the unique contributions and where there's lots of opportunities. So yeah, I would try to frame it in that way, I guess.
Yeah, I totally agree with both of you. It's really important to not just stay at the level of computer science expert or NLP expert. I think the future in research is interdisciplinary, because if you want to build models that can be applied to real world and for real people, you actually need to you encounter different challenges that cannot be solved only with computer science or NLP knowledge, right? There's challenges of ethics, or also more specific in the fields you apply to, like medical field or education or environmental. There's so many interdisciplinary fields where we need people to collaborate with and learn from. So that's very valuable, and you should come with a good mindset that you're also very valuable, and you can have a great contribution. Yeah, let's see. We have another question. Let's see. Is it safer to go for a traditional NLP PhD program in a CS department, or something else where NLP is applied to another domain? I guess, say, what does it mean by safer? Maybe you have more job
Exactly. Safer for what?
offers, or maybe job offers or success. I'm not sure what it means by safer. Also, whoever asked the question, you feel free to give more details. You can also speak or write in the chat if you're more comfortable with that. Otherwise, we just assume safer maybe means more job opportunities. I don't know.
Yeah, and then it also depends on what kind of job opportunity. So, if you're someone who's not sure about whether you want a research career, either in industry or in academia, but let's say especially in academia, then there's definitely a sense in which a CS PhD can be very safe. The job market in tech is much bigger than many other job markets. And so if you're on the fence and, not sure what future you want, then yeah, I think, for instance, I was going to say getting a PhD in a computer science department is going to give you much better job prospects than a PhD in a linguistics department, for instance. which is what I teach in, but our PhDs do fine in the tech job market as well. So I didn't want to say anything too negative, but you know, so in that sense, it can be safer. If you are sure that you do want a research career, let's say, in academia in particular, but also research careers in industry, I do think there can be a risk where you'll do the best research if it's something that you care about and that you're sort of more internally motivated to pursue. And if you're making the choice based on what you perceive to be sort of external research market trends, you're not going to be as internally motivated, and the research that you produce probably won't be as exciting. And so if you're getting into a PhD in order to sort of do that, I would say to follow the thing that excites you and that is motivating to you. And if that's a field besides CS and besides like core NLP, there's like nothing at all wrong with that.
Yes. Also, the person just added by safer, they meant more opportunities in research.
Okay. Yeah, so I actually wanted to know something else. So what is the background of the person then? Like, I mean, is it a CS person wanting to do a PhD and then thinking about, CS PhD or getting into a domain, or is it somebody with a particular domain expertise who is thinking about shifting domains? So, but apart from that, like something that I've observed in so this data science jobs in the industry. So I spent some time in the technology companies before when I moved out of academia. So I'm speaking from that knowledge. So in many companies, like you see a lot of data science teams and people doing a lot of NLP work. It's not related to research. It's more like application development kind of thing. But there are a lot of like people with PhDs in these companies, like PhD in biology who just got onto this NLP and deep learning and all these things and just started contributing to those projects. So if you think about it in those kind of scenarios, like I actually think keep your domain expertise and you can always gain these skills of NLP and deep learning and things along the way, like as long as you're not actually doing a research project, building a large language model or these kind of things, because there are like there is a whole world out there who don't care about research but cares more about developing real things that real people use. So it really depends on the motivations of that person. And yeah, research need not be the only thing that motivates people to do this kind of work.
Yes, definitely. Let's see, we have another question. What would you suggest for someone who's trying to do research along with doing a full-time job? It's extremely hard finding professors who'd collaborate with the part-time student.
Okay, I get these inquiries all the time, so maybe I can answer. I get a lot of inquiries on LinkedIn of this kind, like there are people doing some job and they're interested in NLP, they want to do something together. There are some practical constraints for that, as you may all probably know. So my suggestion is to look for, so there is this newsletter called Towards AI that comes every week, and there is a community component of that newsletter where people post messages saying, I'm looking for some collaborator on this project and so on. So I think it's better to start there, like looking at those kind of projects rather than directly looking at these professors or whoever who already have some full-time jobs and have their own projects to suddenly come out of their way and start working with you without knowing you and without having some kind of structure. So that's what I would suggest. Just look for those. There are always those communities everywhere, like in different parts of the world. I can't point to a specific community in each country or whatever, but I mean, if you start looking up, you'll find out. And a lot of them also do operate remotely. You don't need to be in person to be able to collaborate and build something together. And yeah, everything need not result in an ACL paper. So I mean, if you don't write an ACL paper, that does not mean you're not doing research.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the applied side of research is also very valuable, right? That's how you get things done in real life and helping people. So, of course, that's very valuable. Can you say again the name of the platform you mentioned? It was Towards AI, or
Towards AI, yes.
can you paste maybe the link in the
Yeah,
chat?
I'll just paste here.
Great. Thank you so much. I think will benefit many people
Thanks.
looking to start their first research project.
I just wanted to echo all of that. And, when I receive these inquiries too of like, oh, do you have a summer internship for me? And when there's sort of no context and it's the person I've ever met, it's sort of, the reaction is like, well, there's lots of things that are already happening, but then to do the startup and training with someone who is doing something full time and who I've never met, it's just, the initial reaction is like, this is going to be a lot of work and I don't know whether it's going to yield anything. And so I definitely agree with the like finding sort of posted opportunities in the first place, as Sowmya mentioned. And then, I do think there's more and more opportunities for the kind of thing that the person is asking about, as there's more and more sort of like distributed research communities existing in general. And so like the paradigm I have in mind is this Eleuther AI, who sort of started as, this is Eleuther AI, that started as sort of few people who got together and decided they basically wanted to try to reproduce GPT-3 in a completely open manner. And it's a very completely distributed, decentralized organization of, volunteers basically. And, they have some funding now, but when it started, there was just some donations of GPUs and whatnot. And they conduct everything on a Discord server, and, sort of anyone who has the skills can join and jump in. And that's sort of one prominent example, but I'm seeing more and more sort of entities of that type, where it is kind of just a distributed research organization that's always looking for people with skills. And I think that's exactly the kind of organization that someone who's working full time can still make really valuable contributions to and get involved in a sort of hands-on way with.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you also for putting the name in the chat. So Eleuther AI. Also, I think the same person commented on Slido that this is great advice for someone totally new, but mostly they are non-serious people. I have a preprint paper, but even so, it's super hard to progress. Yeah, I understand. It's it's also very competitive, right? It's there are many, especially in AI, there are so many people applying. At least I know for the PhD, there are so many applications at University of Michigan. It's really hard to go through all of them.
So maybe, I'm not saying this is going to work, but maybe what they can do is, when you're communicating, contacting some professor or somebody, ask, if they can refer you like to some, if just give names of other people working in this topic or something like that. Not connecting by email or whatever, but just, I let us say, I want to work on this problem. I know you work on this problem. If you can't work or whatever, just can you recommend somebody? So this is how I found my PhD advisor. Like, I randomly emailed somebody, some researcher, and said, I'm interested in working on this topic. Do you know any new university professor? And then they suggested somebody, and I applied. That's for a PhD position, of course, not for like this side projects. But I mean, I agree that there is no such ecosystem where these people working full time can contribute to some kind of research projects and work together into a paper. There is this universal NER paper and the Slack channel, right? So there are those kind of papers where like many people get together and different people contribute for different languages, and eventually it results in a paper. But I mean, those are not specific to your interests, right? Like they're more general in nature.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, being more specific. Also, that I think that applies to everything. Like, even if you have a PhD or you're working in CS, in the NLP frontier of research, for finding internships, I had much more success by contacting specific people, like reading their papers, especially papers that were of interest to me, were very similar to what I'm interested in or what I plan to work on, or I already had some experience in that there. And yeah, be very specific, like to the point, like, oh, I really like your research. I also do this, or I'm thinking of doing that. So I think that also goes a long way to catch the interest of the person you're trying to collaborate with. Yeah, as opposed to a generic email that maybe it's harder to read, and you get a lot of those, so it's harder to stand out. So being very specific and honest, and that's really important.
Yeah, and I still think it is very difficult, despite all these things, to make it work is really difficult. Like I've had a paper where the author was a full-time working person, and we got into this kind of, we just met at a conference and thought maybe we should do something together, but it took like much longer than what it would take for a typical project of that kind to, bring it to some kind of closure, mainly because life happens, and there are other things. Like, it's not a priority to anybody. That's the problem there. Like, everybody has to do it after their regular things, like after their full-time job or after their other research projects or things like that. So I think it's in general difficult to do this kind of things, but I mean, doing what we just discussed, like being specific and setting time aside for it, these kind of things, maybe you can mitigate it slightly.
Yeah, definitely. So I don't see any more questions on Slido. Again, if you have questions, don't forget to add them to Slido. I can ask a question. What do you like in your experience working with interdisciplinary teams? What kind of challenges stood out, and maybe what you did to overcome them? You can also give an example, like a project you work on and it was particularly challenging, or yeah, you can remember right now.
Yeah, it's hard to think about exactly the right sort of level of specificity in answering this question. I guess when it is like a team research project and you have different types of expertise, like we've been talking about this whole session, and different skills that are all contributing to a larger project, I do think the more well-defined those pieces can be, the better. So, oh, this group from the clinical setting is going to generate this data for us, and sort of being very explicit about like what you need from them in order to be able to do the modeling that you need, and then vice versa, being very explicit about like, and setting up timelines for those things can be like basically coordinating can become really difficult. And I mean, in my own life, I haven't been the best at being very clear and detailed about all of these things. And when it has worked, the best is sort of like, here's a one-page Google Doc for like each component describing exactly what's needed, and then how all the things are going to fit together, just so that yeah, everyone knows what their sort of role is and what their contribution will be to the larger project. Definitely, I think without that, it can be very confusing for everyone involved.
Yeah, I was thinking about, I mean, I don't want to give specific examples, but there are two issues maybe I can think about. The first thing is, just being seen as like that person who can program without, any new, it's not being seen as like a researcher who also knows something about their field and, can bring something into this problem. So that was something that I faced in some of the projects I collaborated with. And the way I address them is mostly, just trying to assert more where I can, and just trying to talk about, what is the difficulty with the task and why it is just not running a program and getting the output and kind of stuff. It does not always work. Sometimes it's difficult to make other people see value in that in those kind of projects, value for NLP in those kind of projects. I mean, but it mostly comes out of their own ignorance. Then um, so it's not a problem with. I don't think it's a problem with NLP researchers themselves. The second issue I found is the issue of specificity. Like say in one of the projects, we were running some. We were getting some, we were doing some feature extraction from this parsing and all these things. And we went back and forth over this question of how can you trust the parser? And then let us say you're calculating, I don't know, number of noun phrases for a sentence or whatever. Like, how do you know the parser is good? How do you know this number of, like we don't write tests for unit tests or something like that for NLP programs like they do in general software engineering, right? So I found it very difficult to explain through this, like just take. We took a few examples and went through them manually, and that was okay to some extent, but it was hard to quantify. Like there are different subcomponents in an NLP system, and how do you know each individual component is good? Is something that we don't really think about that much when we are working on an NLP problem. But when you're working with other disciplines, these more fundamental questions come up. I don't think I'm not going to claim that I know how to solve this issue. We try to work out by documenting as much as we can about the programs and about cases where it may fail and things like that. But it's still, in my opinion, it's still an unsolved problem. Like these kind of more specific details about how these programs work and why an output is in a certain way for a given input, like I don't think it's possible to give answers in a typical software testing kind of like in a typical software testing kind of scenario.
Yeah, thank you for sharing from your experience. I'm also very interested in interdisciplinary projects. I mostly worked in NLP, only with PhD students or master students, undergrads, but all in CS. So we didn't have to think so much of these problems. But as a future professor, I really want to collaborate more with the people from outside academia, maybe with hospitals or with the education department. And I can see how that will bring new challenges. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing from your experience. And I'm sure that also our audience really values that. Yeah, we're also towards the end. So yeah, I wanted just to finalize our meeting and thank you so much. Thank our speakers and yeah, people who also contributed with questions that helped a lot. And yeah, that also made my work easier because I had to also take care of the spammers and stuff. So next time we'll make sure we have a good link and we don't encounter these problems anymore. So yeah, again, thank you so much for your time and for sharing from your experience. It's really valuable for everyone.
Yeah, thank you for organizing and thanks to everyone for the questions and discussion.
Thank you. And regarding the spammers, think of it as some sign of growing popularity for ACL mentorship.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Also, thanks the bots for the fun. I guess they were also.
Sorry you had to deal with that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. Have a good day, everyone.
Have a good day, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Take care.